So we are thrilled that you're here with us today. And I am going to very quickly segue into our training. And I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce who you're going to be hearing from today. I have the great pleasure to be introducing one of my dearest friends and one of my dearest colleagues. Her name is Didi Mascarenas. And those of you that don't know Didi, Didi just did the keynote this year at the Attach conference, and I think blew everybody's mind. Didi is a clinician, a consultant, a trainer, nationally known trainer, and a trauma expert. And her area of expertise includes a tremendous amount of lived wisdom and lived expertise. One as an adoptee, and she'll be sharing a lot of that experience with all of us here today. Didi Mascarenas, for those of you that haven't experienced her training, is really one of my favorite individuals to listen to. So I invite you today to kind of sit back and kind of take Didi in. We are recording this webinar, so you'll be able to watch it again at another time. So really some of what Didi is going to be walking you through connected to intergenerational trauma and the lifelong impacts, helping us understand the impact of that trauma, and then helping to lean into how we assist in the healing of that intergenerational trauma. So without further ado, my dearest friend and colleague, Didi Mascarenas, I'm going to hand the baton over to you. Didi does have a PowerPoint she's going to be sharing with all of you today. So I invite you to sit back and relax and enjoy. We will be spending the last 10 minutes approximately of this webinar with your Q&A, with questions and answers with Didi. So save those questions to the end, and we're happy to take a few minutes to answer any of your questions that come up from today's webinar. And with that, Didi.
Thank you.
Take it away, my friend.
Thank you so much, Allison. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Before I put on my PowerPoint, what I want to say is Allison, I adore as well. We have a little love fest going on, but she is not just a colleague and a friend, but she's also been a mentor over the years. And I will share with you throughout our time today, really the summary of over 30 years experience in our field. And I will say, you will notice because of some of the cases or stories I might share that I don't just specialize in adoption. I do a lot of other work, but that work has also made me a better therapist working with families created through adoption and vice versa. All of the attachment and the trauma and the loss, all of that helps inform my practice with the other clients that I work with as well. So it just feels like it works hand in hand. And I'm a big believer in everyone and everything that comes into our life comes in to teach us something. So I've been really grateful for all the different types of experiences I've had professionally and personally. And I try to use them in my own healing journey, professionally and personally. So today, let's give me a little moment here to share screen. So, glasses. Now I get when they say that, what is that saying? Aging is not for the weak or something like that. I'm now older. I just turned 65 this year. So it's been very interesting to see all of the changes that have happened in me and that continue to happen over time. But today we're going to look at intergenerational trauma, healing the wounds within diverse familial systems. And that's a nice falutin title to really talk about how our lives have been impacted throughout numerous generations, especially as people of color or people who are marginalized. And I do want to start by saying that by no means do people of color or people who are marginalized hold are the only holders of any kind of trauma that has occurred. Everyone, or mostly everyone on this planet, has experienced some kind of loss or some kind of pain or some kind of trauma in their lives, some more than others. So it's not just something that we see with people of color or the BIPOC community, if you will. And so I think that's important to share. But I will say that it is important to understand, especially because we are creating families through adoption. And a lot of times you're bringing people together, like in a marriage, that are from very diversely different backgrounds. They may even be from the same culture, they may be from the same race, but you grow up in a different way and you bring that with you to the table. And some of you may think, oh, well, that doesn't matter if you adopt a child who's a baby, but it does. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while when we talk about epigenetics and what that means, that we are still impacted by a lot of things, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually and conceptually when we come from a particular community, because it is passed down from generation to generation. What I will also share is, so you'll have some understanding, I have had over 30 years experience as a therapist, and I've worked predominantly with a lot of people of color, as well as Caucasian or white folk. I have worked with a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, people who are dealing with just trying to find who they are, their sense of self, their identity, developing self-esteem. And another area has been definitely looking at this whole issue of working with people of color or people who are part of the LGBT community, or people who find themselves marginalized because they're hearing impaired or disabled in some way or physically challenged in some way. And what happens is that we begin to feel marginalized over time because mainstream society, or the larger society that we live in, dictates a lot of how we see the world, how we see if we fit or don't fit in. It also dictates whether we get treated a certain way or not, whether we have certain opportunities or not. And if you are not part of these communities, then it's really difficult sometimes for people to understand what we're talking about. So for many of us, we don't feel like we fit in anywhere. We only fit in with our particular group or our little tribe. And a lot of times we feel this way, not just because it's personally being given the messages that we are not good enough or not valuable enough or not worthy enough, but over time, what we begin to see is institutionalized racism. Because essentially what I'm going to talk about today is how racism affects us, how any kind of ism affects us in a negative way. And most of us who grow up this way grow up in two worlds. We grow up learning how to be in the mainstream world, and we continue to live in our world, especially if you come from an immigrant family or a family of color. And it's really important to understand. In the last training that I did on this topic, it was interesting because an adoptee asked this question, which I thought was really important to ask. She was half Caucasian or white and half Black or African American, but she was brought up in a family that was Caucasian. And she said, even though I am biologically racial, does it still mean that I'm biracial since I'm not growing up in a biracial family? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Not only are you still biracial, but now your family has become a biracial family, because they will also be impacted because they have children who, or a child of a different culture or race. And it becomes important for the family to recognize that we need to embrace this child and embrace everything about them, and not just make that child be a part of our culture or our race or our philosophy, but we need to embrace theirs as well. And it needs to be something you do on a daily basis. Because what happens then is these children in your home may be loved by you, acknowledged by you, accepted by you. You may not see color or race, but when they get out into the world sees color and race and disability and dysfunction and difference. And if you don't know how to help us, your children, then we're left floundering. And a lot of what I was taught through the Kinship, now Seneca, program that we provide for a lot of professionals, the adoption clinical training, is that we want to reduce losses for our kids, not add more to their plate. People of color are fighting institutionalized racism and hatred. They're fighting abuse, negativity, and countless obstacles. They're often riddled with issues of self-esteem, an inability to or stripped of the right to set boundaries for themselves, to know and express their own reality, and to be honored, valued, supported, and ultimately accepted. At the same time as these battles are going on from without, there are battles being fought within that are a direct result of the intergenerational trauma. And that's also what impacts our psyche, our soul, and our bodies. So we're fighting outer isms and we're fighting inner isms. We're fighting things that say, I'm not good enough. And then we have to deal with things in our culture. And I will say, I was going to share at the beginning a little bit about me personally. I am second generation Latina. I was adopted by two Mexican parents, not Mexican, well, yes, actually, in some ways they are Mexican American, and I'll explain that in a minute, but they were born and raised in Mexico. They came here to graduate school, met, got married, and stayed in this country. And then they adopted me, and several years later, they adopted a little boy who became my brother, not my biological brother. And so our lives went on. And I always knew I was adopted since I was little. I was adopted at about 9 days old. And I believe my brother was about like 9 months old. And so adoption still impacts us even though we're babies. A lot of people don't understand that, but it does. It's not just the themes that impact us, but as we continue this morning, you will see that other things impact us on a cellular level that we may not even be aware of. And so the closer you are to your mother country, or the closer you are to the first generation that's come here, the more you will be marinating in a lot of their ideas, values, beliefs, positive and not so positive, that influence us. And we believe epigenetically or intergenerationally that it affects at least 3 or more generations, where these things continue to be promoted throughout our lifetime, and we are impacted by them. So let me go to what I said about America. I want to be clear because we're going to talk about where the challenges come in for people who are marginalized or people of color. And in particular, we're going to look right now at individualistic cultures versus collectivistic cultures. And many ethnic cultures or traditional or indigenous cultures tend to be collectivist in their worldview. And I'm going to say that individualistic cultures like the United States is very different than the Americas. And this may be very difficult sometimes for some people to understand, because you say this all the time, but I don't think a lot of people realize the United States is not the only America that exists. There is North, Central, and South America. Canada's America, Mexico's America, Guatemala's America, Venezuela's America, Brazil is America. America encompasses a lot of cultures and numerous races. And even the fact that we only think of the United States as being America, they have usurped that title, and the world looks at it that way, and they think of us as Americans, and they don't look at other countries and necessarily think of them as Americans. They think of them as being from whatever country they're from. But this is part of what happens with racism, that says our culture or our ways of being or our ideology is better than yours. It's not just that it's different, but it's better than. And that's what part of why racism is so painful or difficult for those of us who are not seen as part of the acceptable culture or race or belief system. And initially, when I was teaching these kinds of diversity trainings in the 1980s, that lets you know that there is still a problem. Even before the civil rights movement, there was a problem in acceptance and inclusivity and equality. It continued on into the 80s, even after voting rights and things that changed in this country. And it continues to this day. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have things like the Black Lives Matter movement, even the Me Too movement, that people are starting to wake up now during this pandemic time that we had and really say, we are tired of not being acknowledged. The thing about the movie West Side Story, if you haven't seen it, that really stood out for me when I was watching it most recently, the most recent incarnation of that, is that the movie really is about racism and how people are trying to fit in and just being treated equally and treated with value. And the song's word, Somewhere, is about, we all want a place to fit in. We want a place for us. We want a place where we are acknowledged and valued and heard and seen. So in an individualistic culture, what they value most is independence, competition, respect for innovation or youth. They tend to be more present and future focused. The family's more nuclear. There's dignity based on credentials, title, or knowledge. There's a belief that we can control life. There's a big focus on materialism. And think about the United States, folks. Think about who we are and how we promote ourselves. We tend to be monotheistic, and there's ethnic diffusion, that people start to get disconnected from their ethnic self. Ooh, I just saw a typo. My perfectionistic self is having a hard time with that, but I will let that go. Collectivist cultures look at things a little differently, and it's not like it's right or wrong or bad or good. It's just that it's different. It's about more a focus on interdependence and cooperation, a respect for elders. Past is much more important than the future. We are also present-oriented. Extended family is family. It's not just the mother, father, brother, sister. It's not just the nuclear family, but extended family, which means cousins, uncles, aunts, grandparents, second cousins, dogs, chickens, everybody is family for us. There's a sense of dignity that's based on wisdom, your role, and your life experience. We tend to look at life as being something that we flow with or we don't flow with. It's more of a process. There's a lot of spiritual or moral values that we carry. We have a polytheistic view in many cultures, and there's a strong ethnic identity for us. So what happens for those of us who are children of immigrants or people who are marginalized is that we learn to live in an individualistic culture during the day, if you will, when we're out in the world. But at home, we are living with a collectivist culture. So there's a big dissonance that happens for us. Another set of values might be that for an individualistic culture, they like change and formality, direct communication. They're very practical, and they really believe in personal control. For a person who is of a collectivist culture, it's more about tradition, formality, indirect communication, an idealism or romanticism about how they see the world, and the life is controlled by God. If you spend time with people of color, you will see these differences. You may not have been able to understand that, and as I break this down, maybe now you can see why there's some of these differences. And a lot of times, again, differences are seen as bad instead of just different. In the 80s, what we were talking about was more about assimilation, becoming part of the mainstream culture, whether you're Latino or not. If you're a person of color, it was about letting go of our cultural values, mores, beliefs, ideas, and integrating ourselves and assimilating into the larger mainstream culture. And what we realized was that it was called the melting pot. And over time, what we realized is it wasn't happening. It wasn't melting. It was not coming together. And so a new idea came into effect in the 80s, and it was a salad bowl. And trying to understand that everybody brings a different flavor to the table, and it can add to it and make it better. That's the idea, but it doesn't always happen. Another part of our culture as people of color, and it's not just Latinos, but Latinos have a word for this, and it's called personalismo. We want to get to know you before we let you into our lives. We want to get to know you before we trust you with our money. We want to get to know you before we open ourselves up. Otherwise, it is too vulnerable for us. And so we keep ourselves shut off. One of the things I learned in doing these trainings for cultural diversity was, one of the examples we used to share is back in the day, and remember this is 1980, we used to the Japanese used to send a lot of their young people to college here. And it was because the Japanese culture is very, very rigid and very hierarchical. And they don't allow for a lot of creativity back then. And what they realized with the United States was there was so much creativity because we're about innovation and everything bigger and better and newer. And so they sent their folks here to train. And just that piece alone was mind-boggling to me. So when we sent people to Japan to do business with them, what we discovered was the American way of doing business didn't work as well because we were like, come on, we got things to do, places to go, people to meet. Let's make this happen. And Japanese were about personalismo. Japanese were about wanting to go out to dinner, wanting to go to karaoke, wanting to hang with these people before they invested money in them or did anything with them because they needed to know who are we working with. So it's important then to recognize that all of these traditions and values and rituals are important. And during the pandemic, we got to see a lot of those in a lot of shows and movies, especially during quarantine, that we had never seen. Like I became a big fan of Indian weddings. They are amazing. But it was really starting to open our eyes up to how global we are. And the internet certainly has helped with that. But what happens then for those of us who are marginalized in some way or who are people of color is we, again, like I said, live in two worlds. And we have to learn to be bilingual, trilingual, sometimes quadrilingual. And what some of us call this is code switching. Harvard Business Review says defines code switching as follows. Broadly, code switching involves adjusting one style of speech, appearance, behavior, and expression in ways that will optimize the comfort of others in exchange for fair treatment, quality service, and employment opportunities. And if you've never had to live life as a marginalized person or a person of color, this makes no sense to you because you've never had to code switch. And if you think about this, if you are adopting children who belong to any of these groups, LGBT group, hearing impaired group, African American, Latinos, Asian, they're going to be living in two different worlds. And if you don't understand that, it's going to be much more difficult for them. Another way to look at the idea of code switching is that we have two different ways of being, of dressing, of talking. African Americans have another way of talking that they call Ebonics. Latinos have another way of talking that for some of us, we combination of English and Spanish. And what we've been looking at now over the years is the idea of biculturation rather than assimilation. And it's bringing the best of both worlds together so that we can move forward and feel good about ourselves. Because what happens is we are left feeling badly about ourselves for being different. Another way to look at the idea of code switching is that when interviewed, Jennifer Hudson, who played Aretha Franklin in the most recent movie on Aretha, talked about the difficulty she had in learning how to be demure and not speak her mind, because Aretha grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and she was definitely an activist, but she was taught that you were not supposed to speak up or make a fuss. And she had to learn, Aretha had to learn how to get her point across in quiet ways, but she did it. And that's what Jennifer said she had to learn because she came from a different generation. And if you look at this, you might look at the intergenerational issue where Aretha might have been like first or second generation and Jennifer might be third or fourth generation. As you move down, as you move into the later generations, they don't feel the same pull as first or second generation folk who are more connected to the traditional ways of looking at the world or living in the world. Another way for people who don't understand this is to look at the movie Coda. Coda won an Academy Award, several Academy Awards, but it's really based on the story of a deaf family who are 3 members are deaf and 1 member is hearing. And the 1 member that's hearing is a young girl who has to translate everything for her family all of her life. And it's exhausting for her. Sometimes it's scary for her. Sometimes it's embarrassing for her. And this is what a lot of Latino children have to go through when they come here and their parents don't understand the language yet. And children learn the language much faster than adults. If you want a glimpse on what this looks like, even though it's funny, it's very poignantly true. There are two comedians that talk about this in their acts. One is Cristela Alonso, and another one's Felipe Esparza. Felipe Esparza in particular did a stand-up show called Translate This, where he talks about his experience. And really what we're saying to people is all we want is mutual respect. We don't want to be treated differently. We don't want handouts. We just want to be acknowledged as having value and worth. Cesar Chavez, a Latino activist, a Mexican activist, actually Mexican-American activist, said, preservation of one's own culture does not require contempt or disrespect for other cultures. So what happens is then looking at the idea of adoption is the attachment. And there are attachment breaks that happen that are related to some of these themes that we're talking about that impact the early development and later development of a child. What we'll talk about in a minute is how immigration and trying to fit in to part of the mainstream culture oftentimes will create situations that lead us to unhealthy behaviors. And sometimes there's unhealthy parenting that goes on in our cultures. And then there's abuse in our cultures, neglect in our cultures, a lot of early childhood losses. Immigration alone can be very traumatic for people, depending on what age they immigrated, what was going on in their life development. And their physical development, the reasons why they came to this country, the process, as I mentioned, of biculturation versus acculturation or assimilation, dealing with racism in a way they've never had to deal with before, poverty, and then ultimately epigenetics. And all of these different things can create attachment breaks between the parent and the child. And even if you adopt a child who doesn't continue to grow up with their biological family, a lot of these things still sit in their cells. They're still impacted by a lot of these ideas. And they grow up with children of different cultures and races as well. Some of the challenges that my kiddos have that I work with are they may be children of color who were adopted by a Caucasian or white family, but because their family wants to give them the best, and I understand this completely, really. If you have more resources, then you can send your children to better schools, you can live in better communities, but the more you do that, you take that child away from what their culture is, and you take them away from part of what they need to define themselves. And I'm not saying you have to live in poor communities, but you need to begin to learn, if you're a family who is intercultural or interracial, how to bring that into your daily life experience. Because again, our children need your help and assistance going through this, and they're going to live in a world very differently than yours. There is if you can't tell by now, I'm a big movie/TV person, but really big movie person. And there's a docuseries about Colin Kaepernick. And in it, he talks a lot about what it was like for him to grow up in a white family being an African-American child, and how his parents didn't see the world he did. And when he was with his parents, he would get a certain treatment. When he wasn't with them, it was a very different treatment. And parents need to understand that to be able to help these kids. And you cannot always help these kids if you never had this life experience. So you need to be more inclusive in your life and bring more people into your life to help your children grow and heal and become the best version of themselves. And just imposing one idea and one culture and one value will not help children who come from different cultures or different races, or the LGBT community, or any kind of marginalized culture. When I talk about this being on a cellular level, if you haven't read his work yet, Bessel van der Kolk has written several books, and one of his quote is, "Trauma comes back as a reaction, not a memory." And many of you who maybe are already adoptive parents who work with children who've been traumatized understand that, because we see the behaviors in the children. We see the behaviors that are challenging and difficult, not just for us, but they're challenging and difficult for our kiddos. So I was alluding a minute ago about what happens to a family that's been marginalized and especially when we talk about immigrant families, what happens to their values and ideas? And the things that may be beautiful about a collectivist culture get tainted somehow, and we become dependent, sometimes aggressive. The respect for elders and for life experience gets turned into a respect for power, present focused. So it's really hard to think about the future when everything seems really bleak and you're just doing everything you can to live in today's world. And the past is very difficult because why are you going to hold on to the past? You're trying to just survive. So you're in survival mode. So that what happens then is there's a lot of maladaptive family traits that start to develop. This is where the faulty parenting might come in, or the harmful parenting might come in. There's a lot of parenting that's done by guilt and shame in ethnic communities. Dignity, as I mentioned, is based more on power or fear. And what happens to our natural developmental process is it gets interrupted or destroyed. Power and money become more important for us rather than who you are as a person. There's pseudo-theism that it separates us from the spiritual part of who we are, and it affects our ability to see ourselves ethnically in a positive way. Epigenetics. Robert Penn Warren says this about epigenetics. You live through that little piece of time that is yours, but that piece of time that is not only your own life, it is the summing up of all other lives that are simultaneous with yours. What you are is an expression of history. So we already know that the DNA gets passed from one person to another, and we know that genetically we can pass things on, but emotionally, spiritually, the way we look at things, or worldview, those get passed on too. And they get passed on by a culture in different ways. And when you grow up in these cultures, you know, you are told verbally or non-verbally, that's not okay to act that way. That's not okay to do that. That's not okay to be that way. I'll give you an example of that. So I knew without my parents telling me when I started to work in the workforce that I was not going to wear big earrings. I was not going to wear colorful clothes, and I was not going to use any kind of Spanish at all. So I had to learn to what many of my counterparts and I talk about being white. It's like a different language for us. And we had to learn to act a certain way, to be a certain way, and to talk a certain way to be acceptable. And what's been really amazing, and I've loved watching this, is watching the Black Lives Matter movement and having people say, I want to wear my hair naturally. Why am I not allowed to wear my hair naturally? Why am I not allowed to wear certain jewelry? I am who I am, and you need to accept me. And that, for us, is about being inclusive, to see who we are and value who we are, and not denigrate us or put us down for who we are. So think about all these things that I'm talking about. And if you're a family who is culturally diverse or racially diverse, you need to understand this to move forward, to help yourself and to help your children. And what I'm really talking about is getting woke. And every day, in different ways, I'm still becoming woke. Because when my parents came to this country, they had not been born and raised here, so they didn't understand the dynamics of racism in this country. They understood what was different in Mexico. It was more about poverty. It was more based on whether you had money or not. It was not so much about this kind of country that we live in, where there are so many things that get in our way from moving us forward. So if you can see, this passes from parent to grandparent to parent to child, and it continues. And even third and fourth generations may feel these things. They may not understand why they do certain things or they think a certain way, but it gets passed down, as I say, verbally and non-verbally. And all of this struggle, if we're not given tools to deal with it, if we can't talk about it, if we can't see what's going on and be validated in our reality, our thoughts, our feelings, our needs, and our wants, then it gets stuck in our body. And most of the people that come to me for therapy, and it's not just adoptive families, but a lot of different clients who come for different reasons, especially if they're people of color, there is a tendency to somatize. And what that means is they keep all of this pain in their body. And this is when we see things like nervous tics, headaches, migraines, high blood pressure, all kinds of gritting your teeth, all kinds of physical manifestations of what's going on because they don't know how to process what's happening to them in this world. And so I love this graphic that talks about childhood trauma and how it appears in our bodies, what rejection trauma looks like in our body, what abandonment trauma looks like in our body, what betrayal trauma looks in our body, what injustice looks in our body. And think about all these themes. These are themes that adopted kids deal with, but these are all the themes that marginalized people deal with. Back to the idea that I'm a big movie fan. Encanto is a great movie. If you haven't seen it, it really talks about this in the Latino community. And each one of the characters in Encanto represents a different way of dealing with this, and how each of these characters are stuck and need to break out of this so that they can really thrive. But what happens is grandma, the intergenerational or epigenetic part of the story is, grandma's been traumatized by a lot of loss. So she creates a life and then has her family, even later generations, live in the same way that she wants them to live, based on the trauma that's happened to her. So they begin to be impacted by the way that grandma has seen life, and also impacted by the tools that she has or doesn't have to deal with grief or loss or injustice or trauma. And as I said, each of them represent a different character. In particular, this young girl represents the idea of having to be strong all the time. And basically what we are told as immigrants or people of color or marginalized people is, you need to be strong. And you need to be strong to live in this very challenging world. To be strong means to deny your needs, wants, thoughts, and feelings. To be strong means you must keep going on no matter how sick or tired you are. To be strong means you must learn to ignore your body, mind, and soul signals. To be strong, you must be perfect. To be strong, you must not ask for help. That's weakness. And so this kind of mentality keeps people stuck, and they never move forward because they think that they must be a certain way to be acceptable or to be successful. And you're taught this since you're little. So you really deny who you are, and you act oftentimes differently than who you are. So you're being inauthentic. And you're also asked to be older than who you are. As children, you're asked to really take on the responsibilities of adults sometimes in these families. And what that leads to is an imposter syndrome. If I've been pretending since I was a kid to have it together, then when I get to real adulthood, I think I'm still pretending, even if I'm not. But there is this sense that I'm still not good enough somehow. Think about that too. A lot of adopted children have the sense that we're not good enough somehow. We're not lovable enough somehow. So if you add that to the mix of an adopted child's already struggling with those thoughts or feelings, and they're also a different culture or a different race or marginalized in some way, then it leads to even more challenges for them to have to overcome. And it leads to a lot of guilt and shame and self-doubt. Another great movie to look at for this theme, and I call it like the Asian Encanto, is Turning Red. And Turning Red is not about menstruation. It's really about this little girl who's not allowed to be who she authentically is. And so when she does allow herself to be authentic, it's usually with anger or frustration, and she turns into this big red panda. And it's really about learning to honor ourselves, to own ourselves, to integrate ourselves, to love ourselves. And I will say that it's very difficult for first generation to understand these movies, especially like Encanto, because they don't see it. They're still trapped in what they live in their psyche and their soul. And they don't know how to help us, the second or third or fourth generations oftentimes, which leaves us feeling alone. So again, think about how adopted children feel sometimes when they're in families who don't reflect their history or their biology. And they're already struggling with not feeling like they fit in. So how do we define ourselves? And there's many ways to define ourselves, but all of these are impacted by what we're talking about, whether the different aspects of who we are, our culture, our sexual orientation, our gender identity, our physical and mental abilities, our connection to religion or spirituality, our nationality, socioeconomic status, and our race. All of those things go into defining who we are. And for an adopted person, it's a big, big challenge, especially if we don't have enough information about our biological history, as well as our cultural history or racial history. And you cannot manufacture that. One of the things that I struggle with is really helping families understand you need to be respectful of the other person's culture or race or belief systems, like you would in a marriage. You need to integrate the two. I have a family that I'm working with. It's a lesbian couple, and they have adopted several children, and they have all children of color. And they live in a very affluent community. And one of their children's now becoming a teenager. And he's really struggling with a lot of thoughts and feelings, and he's very angry. And it's really about, he doesn't have anyone that reflects himself in the community they live in. He gets a lot of racial slurs thrown at him, and he's constantly on the defense. And he's very, very, very traumatized by this. And the way he deals with it is just being irate all the time and inappropriate. And it's a shame that he has to do that. And as hard as they try, they're trying to find people to bring into their lives, but they needed to have done that when they started the whole adoption process. If I'm going to adopt interculturally or interracially or adopt children of different sexual identities or LGBT community or marginalized in some way, I have to change the way I live. It's like when you have a baby, you're going to childproof your house. You do that ahead of time. Another movie I really love, it's actually not a movie, it's a series. It's The Man Who Fell to Earth, and it's about an alien who came down trying to find out how to save his planet. But in order to save his planet, he needed to come to Earth and find what he needed here. And he had to learn about Earthlings and how we are, and he was shocked at who we were. And what he really realized is the way to save his planet and to save us was through understanding and love, which leads us to the idea of it takes a village. In order to do this healing work, first of all, you have to understand what you're dealing with. You have to open your eyes and see what we're talking about. And this state of being woke or being aware culturally, racially, is a lifelong process, just like adoption is a lifelong process. It's a lifelong process to me. I'm still seeing places where I'm not aware of all of the ways that I've been impacted negatively, or the way I live my life trying to live within 2 or 3 or 4 cultures. So how do we create healthy families? And mind you, this is something I can talk about forever because this is 30 plus years of my work. But briefly, I will go over some of the healing things. Is we need to begin to think differently about our children, ourselves, the adoption process, the adoption world, because we need to start to make some systemic changes in how we recruit families, how we support families, how we educate families, how we encourage families. What I want to also say is, I'm not saying that I am against intercultural or interracial adoptions. I am saying, though, that when we do that, we create more challenges for our children. So if we recruited differently and we looked at families of color differently, that we might get more families of color, because we do not have enough families of color. We do not have enough LGBTQ families. We do not have enough families who have children who might be hearing impaired, or who be sight impaired, or who might have physical challenges, because we don't recruit in a way that we are inclusive of those families, or the recruitment practices are so stringent that those families are not encouraged to participate. And we need to get these families on board, and we need to create programs that help support them so that they can help these children prosper and grow. We also have to create safety for our kiddos. Sometimes in working with trauma, people are relearning how to feel and be safe in what has felt like a scary world. And for some of our people, they've never felt safe. So relearning how to feel safe is one thing, but learning to feel safe is a whole nother thing. And it's learning to, again, systemically, how do we give everyone a voice? But we have to start on a personal level. I need to see you. I need to know you. I need to hear you. I need to honor you, and vice versa. Justice Sotomayor wrote a book about people with disabilities and challenges. and it's called Just Ask. And it's a book about being accepted for who you are, just as you are. We want to be seen and heard and valued. That's the message. So yes, love is important. It needs to start with love. But beyond that, we need to have more understanding, more comprehension, more inclusivity, more exposure to different cultures and different ideas. We need to really help our children on a visceral level. We need to help our children in so many ways. Also, healing happens in community. It doesn't happen alone. And I find a lot of times our adoptive families feel so overwhelmed that they don't make the time to reach out to other people. And it's invaluable to reach out to other people in our community. There's other families who've gone through this before you, or you've gone through this, and you can help other families who are just starting to go through this process. And it's healing in community. When you see, if you see, and I will encourage you to watch these movies, Encanto and Turning Red, what helps them heal is that the elders become a part of the healing process for the young. And it's almost like they're giving us permission. And we need that in order to move forward. There also can be a lot of help from ancestral healing or ancestral beliefs. And I have to say that that cannot be done by a Caucasian or white person. Ancestral healing really has to be done with a mentor or folks who are of your similar culture or ideology or race, and they can be a part of your whole system. It's not just mom and dad. Yes, mom and dad, or mom and mom, or dad and dad are invaluable. But remember, we want to be inclusive and bring other people to be a part of this to help us heal and prosper. And that's the idea of it takes a village. It is not just that you do it alone, it takes a village. And to incorporate for many people spirituality or religion that is healthy and loving and inclusive. And a lot of times these are very valuable ways to help our kiddos. I will say this, that for many children, sometimes it's hard for them to accept religion or spirituality in a home when they get adopted, especially if they're older and they've been through trauma. And you try to tell them that God is loving and God is kind and God is always there for you. And their life experience has not shown them that. So if you're a family who has spiritual or religious beliefs and you're adopting these children, in particular, you need to live your life in a certain way to let them know it is safe here. And not all religion looks like that. And there is a God. And I want to teach you how to be open to something greater than yourself by showing you who I am. And I talk about that personally because my father was a Baptist minister. He was also the son of a Baptist minister, and my mother was the daughter of the Baptist minister. And spirituality was a big thing in our lives, and it's really been a huge resource for me. Yes, I've had to deal with some of the toxic religious ideas that I was exposed to and move more into a spiritual world for myself, but God has been and continues to be an important part of my healing journey. That may not be true for everyone, and that's okay. But for people of color, it tends to be a big resource, and we want it to continue to be something that's positive. As I mentioned before, the healing journey has got to include the older generation. I do a lot of this work with first generation folk too to help them, because if we don't, it continues to go on. And that's epigenetics. It continues on through generations. That's intergenerational trauma, and we need to stop those patterns. Forgiveness is also an important part of this. And it's not about, sometimes it's about forgiving ourselves for not knowing or for acting in an unkind way, but sometimes it's forgiving someone else for not knowing or acting in an unkind way. So forgiveness is an invaluable part of our healing journey. It's also, as I mentioned before, changing the way we look at things. Brene Brown says, stop walking through the world looking for confirmation that you don't belong. You will always find it because you've made that your mission. Stop scouring people's faces for evidence that you're not enough. You will always find it because you've made that your goal. True belonging and self-worth are not goods. We don't negotiate their value within the world. The truth about who we are lives in our hearts. Our call to courage is to protect our wild heart against constant evaluation, especially our own. No one belongs here more than you. And I want to say here again, this whole training also reflects my decision to biculturate. I'm bringing the best of both of the cultures that live within me together. I'm showing you stories and movies and sharing experiences, as well as quoting people like Brené Brown and Bessel van der Kolk. And that is bringing both of my cultures together, if you will, and trying to have them feel at home within me. Because we create a whole new way of being. We're like a third person, if you will. We're not the first generation immigrant, and we're not part of the mainstream. We're somewhere in the middle, and that's okay. It's important for us to honor ourselves and love ourselves, but we need to be taught to love ourselves, and we need your help if you're our parents. A Mayan greeting is in lak ek, which means yo soy tú. And it's basically it says, I am you and you are me. That's what it means. And it's about that sense of connection. And that sense of connection is intimacy. And in order for us to be intimate with others, we need to see ourselves as valuable and lovable and good enough. And one of the definitions of intimacy that I love is into me you see. It's being authentic and it's being real. And if we don't think like we're valuable and good enough, if we are not accepted, especially by our own family who can teach us to love and accept ourselves, then how do we go out there and think anyone else is going to love and accept us? So we need to do this healing work to be able to prosper and grow. We need to find our tribe to do that. And that means looking for other people who are of like minds and who can help us. And finally, I will end with this quote from Chief Seattle. Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things, all of us are bound together. All things connect. So that's the end of my PowerPoint presentation. And now we have an opportunity for question and answers. So thoughts, questions, answers, comments?
Yeah.
Love to
I'm
hear.
going to jump in, Dee, and say thank you from our collective self for sharing both your professional and your personal wisdom and expertise with us. Dee is a sought after trainer and consultant, as you guys could hear. Dee could do 8 days on the hour you just heard. So I am gonna open it up for folks to lean in to ask Dee some specific questions about what you heard, and we'll have a few minutes to do that.
Excuse me. Hi, everybody. I was late coming to this. I apologize for that. This is Adam Pertman. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm president of NCAP. Hi. Great job, Dee. Thank you very, very much. I see chat disabled in my screen. How should people ask their questions?
They're going to lean in and ask, Adam. We talked about
Okay.
that earlier, just there isn't a chat with this, so folks are going to unmute
Okay,
themselves
that's
and just go ahead and ask.
Okay, great.
Were there any takeaways for people? Did you resonate in any particular places? Did you struggle with something? Did this validate any of you?
Do you agree or disagree with anything you heard?
I'd like to pop in and ask a question.
Sure.
My name is Catherine. I'm an adult adoptee, and I'm new to kind of researching this topic. And so much of what you said resonated. One of the things I've struggled with is just finding mentors. So I grew up in not an interracial, but kind of cross-cultural, like a mix of white and ethnic. And I'm sometimes accepted white, but most of the times I'm not. And finding mentors, people in the professional community who will trust me and want to train me, I would say like it would be easier for me to win the lottery, than find these things. So just like, as an adult adoptee, any resources, you can quickly say like, or anything that would speak to that. But so much of what you said resonated and was extremely helpful. And I'm looking forward to kind of exploring this topic more. So thank you.
Thank you. And yes, you're right. It's really, really, really hard to find mentors. It was hard for me to find mentors when I was growing up. And as I said, I'm 65. Now I can find more mentors, but they're all younger than me, if you will. Because now there's more people that are aware. Now there's more people who understand this. Now there's more people, but there's still not enough. there's still not enough people of color as therapists who are well informed. There's still not enough people of color in different positions of authority, in different agencies. So I would say generically, there's a lot of great books to read out there if you're a person of color or marginalized, but there's not a lot of books that bring together the idea of adoption and these themes. But I will say that the book that Allison and Sharon Roja wrote on the 7 core issues talks a lot about these core issues. And there's a workbook now that you can work on and maybe incorporate it with some of these books that you may be reading that speak to cultural challenges. I will try to see if between Adam and Allison, I can put a list of books together that maybe they can put up on the website. And again, they'll be like generic for African Americans or Latinos or Asians, but that I know of, there's nothing yet that brings us together. And I'm working really hard to try to put the word out there and to let people know and train people. And you might have to be a pioneer for that. And it can be lonely sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, because I was a pioneer for a lot of the work that I'm doing.
Catherine, were you looking for mentors? Is something, I think it's a great idea, Dee Dee, to put up some resources on the site. But Catherine, I wonder if you were looking more locally for mentors for wherever it is you live. Which one or both?
You know, I have no limitation on that. So yeah, in many aspects of life.
So where do you live?
I live outside of Washington, D.C.
Okay, because I think we should also, we can and should also brainstorm whether we can think of some resources that are more local to you.
Thank you.
Hey, Allison. Catherine Shelley here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, I can.
Hey, everybody. So we were curious, my wife and I, my wife, Christy, are there some kinds of sentences or terminology or words that you would recommend if we were wanting to invite the kind of authentic conversation with our 21-year-old Latina daughter? And, you know, of course, there's lots layered underneath that, but, you know, I think we're all interested in, she included, in having, you know, very authentic conversation about our similarities, our differences. And, you know, I'm just wondering if you have some typical ways to start those kinds of conversations.
Do you normally have authentic conversations with your daughter? Is that something that you've nurtured over the years?
She's been with us for, what, 5 years?
Since 2018.
Since 2018. And I would say that with the birth of her daughter, who's now 2, that the possibility and the interactions are certainly going in that direction. And it's been recently, I think, more with her as a mother that these issues are coming to the foreground.
It makes total sense.
Yeah, and you know, it was really tough, of course, because she came to us at an age when she was trying to separate. So, you know, it was really a lot of cross things going on at the same time. But now I think, you know, there are direct conversations going on. But I was just
I think you could use it as a jumping off point and say, you came to this training today or this talk today and say it brought to mind a lot of things that we've had on our heart. And start out by saying, we're sorry if we didn't address some of these things before, or we're sorry that we might not have known some of these things before, but now we're becoming aware and we want to be able to talk with you about it and learn more about it and help you with that, or you help us with that. And so let us just tell you what we learned today or what stood out for us, and just start with that.
Mm-hmm.
Just start with where you're at. But yeah, especially when she's older and there's a lot of things that she may be hiding, even from herself.
Mhm.
But I think it is helpful to start by saying, even though you didn't mean to do it, we're sorry we didn't know more. We're sorry we didn't know better. Or, you know, but now we are open.
Right.
And I
I
will
do
jump
feel
in.
like we-
I'm sorry, I just want to give another tool with a lot of specificity, because exactly this question is, it's where the rubber meets the road for many parents. Like, how do we have these really deep, complex conversations with our child, where that's where all the triggers lie for the child much of the time? So everybody's trying to stay up on the surface because in our book, our workbook for parents, and there was a webinar we just did previously, but there's very specific chapters on identity activities for parents around white privilege and identity formation, and really understanding some of these complexities. And then the very next chapter is on intimacy, how to have deep, meaningful conversations and lay some foundational work for that, because you want to cue the other person, the young person, that we'd love to have a deeper conversation around this and this, and let's make some time for that, and a specific kind of plan for that. So there's a toolbook really built for kind of exactly how to assist with this process moving forward, right? It's not just one conversation, it's many deeper conversations moving forward. But us parents need a lot of those tools to navigate some of the emotional triggers and trickiness that are kind of embedded with children that carry so much trauma into the attachment relationship. So I think that would be a helpful tool.
And I would also say a lot of self-care, because when we as kids start to let you know what we've been holding back, some of us, some of the kids already just tell you straight up, but some of us don't, like me. I hid it all. My brother was in your face with it, but I hid it all. And when I was able to finally talk to my parents, I had so much anger and so much frustration that I wasn't the kindest person delivering my message. And over time, over many conversations over the years and many interactions, that I learned how to continue my healing journey. And I was able to talk to my parents in a different way, with a different tone and a different sense of love and respect and caring for them, because I know that they didn't mean to do anything to me on purpose. I know it was a lack of understanding or experience, but yeah, it's important to be self-caring too, because when you start to open these conversations up, they're challenging for everybody, for us, your child, as well as for you. So love on yourself before, during, and after these conversations, and know that it's going to be many conversations to come. Just open the door for those future conversations to happen over time.
Just 2 cents, and then I'll hand it back to Allison. This is being recorded. If you want to catch up with more of it, or want to recommend it to colleagues, friends, other parents, whatever, please know that it'll be available, and you'll be able to do that through our website. And thank you all for attending. Allison, all yours.
Can I jump in for 1 second before we close up?
Yes, Jennifer, I was going to say,
just
who
a
else?
quickie. And I'm first with Dee Dee, amazing, absolutely amazing hour with you. And I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. Catherine, want to let you know, I am a relative caregiver, one of the first in the state of Connecticut that was licensed. I'm not an adoptive parent. My children are now in their 30s. When they became United States Marines, I had to have that conversation through my learning in my career, all the things I didn't know that I didn't know. I was able to have a conversation with my young children in their early 20s, and just basically said that, listen, there were so many things I didn't know, and I apologize for anything that I might have done incorrectly because I didn't know. And trauma was something we didn't, being the first relative caregiver, I had no trainings. So trauma was never talked about. It was, the behavior didn't make sense to me. It was unacceptable. It wasn't, why are you feeling this way? It was, why are you acting this way? And so please have that conversation. It absolutely changed the whole direction of my relationship with my kids. It's a hard conversation, but it was the best conversation I've ever had.
Right.
Jennifer, thank you. That was the gem of gems, right? So beautiful. Because all of us carry ungrieved, right? Where's our ungrieved trauma, loss, pain, suffering, rejection, abandonment? To ask our children to forgive us for the unhealed parts within us. It's life-changing and life-affirming and healing for us as well. Jennifer, thank you so much for leaning in. And thank you. I love that you brought the voice of our kinship parents into the room. I really appreciate that.
And that's
So
a
we
great example of a village. It takes a village. And that's a great example of finding your tribe. If you open up and reach out, there are other people who will help us.
So we want to thank everyone. First, we want to thank Didi Mascarenas, the amazing, the beautiful soul and spirit that you are, my friend and colleague. This was, and you could hear Didi could again speak 8 days on all of this. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you everyone for leaning in and being present with us today. We appreciate all that you're doing out in the world to heal yourself and help heal those around you. So thank you so much, and tune in for the next NCAP webinar, because this is only the beginning really of our series moving forward. So thank you all and hope to see you soon.